Hi, Tim.
Hey, BA, how are you?
I'm doing well tonight. Uh, excited about talking about this challenging topic tonight of the Supreme Court, and also excited to pitch a few ideas together or share things and learn together. How are you doing?
I'm happy to be here too. Thanks for setting up the beautiful space and making it available for friends and recording because it is late, and so I understand people might have to catch it on a recording. No worries. It's also nice to harvest some highlights for later. But yeah, what an exciting time to be alive, where the whole world is watching to see if our democracy is gonna survive or not.
Yeah, I mean, what a time for human rights right now. It's definitely one of the most vexed and complex times, and this decision, you know, like members of the Supreme Court are talking about the possibility of presidents assassinating their political rivals. So we'll be
With
talking about,
impunity.
yeah, with impunity. So tonight we'll be talking about we'll actually be going to here. I'll just put it on the stage a little bit. We'll actually be looking at this landmark case. It is very, very long. Uh, and we'll be looking at this. We also have here the Federalist Papers, which is mentioned in this Alexander Hamilton.
Now the good news is, you want the good news or the bad news first?
Wait. Good news or bad news? Yeah, you go ahead. Yeah, what do you tell me about it?
Well, the bad news is that the Constitution is very long and these opinions are like hundreds of pages long. But the good news is we have a river guide, somebody who co-founded and is the executive director
cybersecurity
of the Constitution Center in Washington, D.C. And he's a great orator and just very down to earth when he speaks about these things. And so we'll get to listen to him summarize what just happened in the Supreme Court decision. And yeah, so we've got context, we've got first primary sources, and what else? The Federalist Papers that go way back. What was this, 1780s or something?
Yeah, it's we're talking about 1788.
Yeah.
And
and then we've got an interview with constitutional scholars from like top schools around the country.
Yeah. So the scholars that are involved include here. I'll bring this in. This is from the same organization. So it includes here Harold Hongju Ko of Yale Law School, Deborah Pearlstein of Princeton University, and Matthew Waxman of Columbia Law School. And Jeffrey Rosen, again, will be facilitating. So we've got a few possibilities here to look at. And we're also going to start off with some pitches. Do you want to go first, Tim, or do you want me to pitch first?
I can go, sure.
Okay, cool. Let me take this off the stage. And I'm going to, oops, let me see here. And there you go.
Okay. Now, do you want to explain what the pitch is?
Yeah, that's a great. So let me just say a little bit about this. So we want different folks to be able to come into this space and share different ideas and even debate different ideas. We're a nonprofit, so we don't take sides politically. So if people want to do political stuff, that's very specific, we'll debate it here. But we want people to be able to share their wonderful ideas and practice sharing ideas. And sometimes that'll include people who are experts, and sometimes that'll include people who are learning. But we want to create a community where we can share ideas and develop human rights, and people can get practice speaking publicly. And that can include a lot of different things. And sometimes that'll be the beginning of debate, and sometimes that'll be the beginning of agreement. And but this is part of building a democratic community.
So my pitch, thank you for that summary. Yeah. I guess in my, of those different options, I think my pitch would be a kind of analysis of a situation that is very upsetting to me, and a kind of call for a direction that we could go. And let me just go ahead and get started, and we'll see how it goes. How much time do you think? Maybe just a couple minutes?
Yeah, well, like try to see if you can simplify it a lot. Like and see if you can just go for it. If you're a little bit over, that's okay. But see if you can let go.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
I have worked my career protecting and advocating and safeguarding public health and safety. And then I realized that we are in a huge safety crisis called the climate emergency. And then I realized that the climate emergency is just a symptom of the unhealthy economy. And then I thought, well, you mean to say that our current economic system cannot afford health and safety, even if we try? Yes, Tim, that's what I learned. And so I really wanted to know, what does a healthy economy look like? Why is it unhealthy? What's the deal? And that led me to the growth imperative. Every politician, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, every corporation has the imperative of growth, GDP, economic growth to be specific, where GDP is gross domestic product. Gross domestic product was invented to measure all the goods and services produced in a year in the economy. However, it never accounted for social and ecological negatives. And that means that you can cut down a forest and GDP goes up, because it doesn't account for all of the gifts that our tree people community are providing to us, like air we breathe and stormwater management and carbon sequestration. And that's such a big deal, because we're in a climate emergency, because we have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because we're burning too many fossil fuels and we're cutting down too many trees. And we can do that because we don't account for the pollution and the negatives. All that is lost. And so if I could just share my screen real quick, and then I'll be done, because I just wanted to show you what I'm excited about. And can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, it turns out that this is so unnecessary to have economic imperative of growth at all costs, because nobody voted for social and ecological breakdown, but that's what we're getting because all of our current economic system drives the breaking of these 9 planetary boundaries. And I guess, do you see the green earth symbol with the pizza pie wedges in orange that are
Yeah, I know. And folks in the audience, feel free to share what you notice here. I notice ozone layer depletion. I see around climate change. I see ocean acidification. I see chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus loading, freshwater withdrawals, land conversion, biodiversity loss, air pollution. And then goes back to, and then I see on the inside, I see an inner ring. And I see 2 green rings, or 3 green rings, right? Ecological ceiling, social foundation, the safe just space for humanity, regenerative and distributive economy. And on the inside, I see housing, networks, energy, water, food, health, education, income and work, peace and justice, political voice, social equity, gender equality, housing.
Yeah. So
And I see shortfall and overshoot.
Yeah. So you're describing the donut economic model, which uses the 9 planetary boundaries on the outer ring as the ecological ceiling. We need to get our economy inside the donut, and we need to do it quickly because the Earth systems, the other diagram that shows the 6 out of the 9 that have been transgressed, or in other words, their safe limit has been broken. And 6 out of the 9 means we're way overshooting Earth's ability to provide for our economy.
Can you zoom in on that a little bit more? The donut, just to zoom in a little
bit. Yeah. Does that help?
Let's see.
I can probably go to one side. How's that?
Oh, no worries. I can't tell if it's changed or not, but that's okay. If maybe it's okay. We can let it be.
Yeah, maybe it's only zooming from my side, but the QR code can take you to the website. But yeah, if you just look up donut economics, what's really exciting is that there are now several cities around the world implementing donut economic action lab. And I presented this to city council members last week, and I'm trying to get them to implement the same, just to put their work, which is great work, in a larger context. So that's the what for, is that like we have the tools to cool our economy's jets so that we're not overshooting, and focus on human rights and meeting that social floor, which is the 12 United Nations developmental goals, sustainable development goals. So it's very exciting that we could do it if we choose to. And that's my pitch. What do you say?
Thank you. Yeah, this is actually really this is helpful to me, because I've heard you make this before and it was actually more succinct. And we covered a lot of material very quickly. So that was very neat. And I noticed, and by the way, folks in the audience, feel free to share what you're noticing or what you noticed in this. But yeah, I noticed that that you proposed something. What you showed in the donut model was that things outside of the donut were overshooting, and that it was also possible to undershoot goals, and that's a way of thinking about what our carbon goals.
Yeah, carbon is strongly coupled to material throughput in the economy. So we just really need to reduce our consumption. And if we consider what's fair and equitable, there's been an established, sustainable, fair amount of consumption that means that we in our economy in the United States, if we don't reduce our consumption by 75%, like we need to reduce by like we're 4 times over what's
Yeah.
safe and fair consumption. So if, in other words, if everybody lived like we did in the United States, we'd need 4 more planets, and we only have one, obviously. So how we're going to do that? What they're saying is we have to shift our mindset from never having enough and the scarcity mindset where the grass is always greener on the other side. Like you can never have enough. You always want more.
Yeah.
We have to dematerialize our culture and reorganize very intentionally. It's like an intentional community, but it's like throughout the whole system, and it's around producing only what is socially valuable, like healthcare and biosphere restoration and clean transition, local food systems. Like we need to shift how we're doing things to get more efficient, to get more sufficient, and we can do that where nobody gets hurt, and actually our quality of life goes up.
So yeah, so what I hear you arguing is that this is something that's very feasible to do, even though it would be less growth.
Yep.
Great, yeah, and we can explore this more later. But since these are short pitches, now I'll make my pitch, and then we'll move on to what we're talking about with the Supreme Court and the decision of Trump versus the United States. Very quickly before we do that, I just want to remind folks that this week there's going to be 2 more classes. There's going to be a open code lab on Thursday. You can drop in and make a website, make an app, talk to folks about computer programming. And there's also another pitch-in on Sunday that's just, it's not a streaming pitch-in, it's just an informal one. That's at 9:30 Central, 10:30 a.m. Eastern. And feel free to, if you go to codewhatever.us, you can donate to our GoFundMe. We're a 501c3, so donations are tax deductible. And everything that we get, we really do use. It's not very easy researching this stuff and marketing it and making free classes for everybody, but we do it, and every bit really does help because it's very hard work. And with that,
do we have one announcement? Could also be that next week we might start this 1 hour.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Yeah, next week we're going to try to bring it back to an hour earlier where it was before. Yeah, I think that'll be good. And so I have spent many years of my life not being able to, as a trans woman, wear the clothing that I felt suited me, to live life in terms that that suited my dignity and made me feel confident walking into spaces like I actually had a chance for success. Now, with all the privilege I have, imagine how hard it must be for not just trans women, but women of color without the same opportunities I had. And it still even is harder for people like that to, even though many are very, very creative, to know how, when going to look for a job or trying to go to a social engagement, or even just trying to be creative, having advisors who can tell them about different choices they can make and help them find things that they like. And at Code Whatever, we are beginning a new program of clothing swaps where people can show up at a clothing swap and people will help you find what actually matters to you if we're able to. And not only that, but you can also train to facilitate these kinds of workshops. And we're doing this because we actually want to train people who facilitate this for any kind of movement, where we're looking at what people in their own words actually say matters to them, trying to help people on their own terms to practice the management of the future. Now, what benefit does this have? Well, first off, one benefit is that you can actually find clothes that you really like and get rid of clothes that you don't need. But also, you can help other people who would not have these opportunities have more safe and secure lives. And finally, you can learn how to manage systems in a way that actually does what matters to people at a lower cost, because we're just doing the things that people care about. So why not try it today? Thank you.
Nice.
Thanks. What did you notice?
I noticed this is very personal because it's like, our second skin, the clothes we wear, and identity, what you're struggling with from an identity experience is kind of bringing a personal resolution to this at a community level, which is really exciting. You're solving one problem, but with actually many problems simultaneously, and using. I noticed it sounded like demand analysis. Could you explain a little bit more about how you're taking the Vanguard method and applying it to mutual aid within fashion in the community, or within clothing, textiles?
Yeah. So what is really exciting, I think, in this work is that people come in and they have specific needs. They're coming to us for specific things. Some people are going to come because they might have a job opportunity, and normally somebody who's wealthier than them might be able to get the job because they'll come in more polished or something like that. And so they might tell us in their own words, hey, I've got a job next week. I don't know what to wear. It's really hard for me to find something that I really like, that feels like me, but also I need to be professional. And so what we want to be able to do is have facilitators who have different expertise amongst each other, and who can then help people get the thing they want on the first try if possible, or build up a system of data of writing down these things that matter, writing down what are the specific things that matter to that person. What was that thing that they cared about that left them singing our praises? And so not only is it a way that we can help folks get what matters to them, it's also a way that we can practice at, for instance, figuring out what's important, how we can make a flow that doesn't have a lot of wasteful aspects in it. And so then we don't have to worry about growth so much because we're focusing on development.
That sounds like circular economy, a really great first step.
Yeah, I've wanted to actually bring this into your work, but let's go to the Supreme Court now. I think,
Okay.
Unless you've got more thoughts about this, I think we're ready for it. Let's go for it.
Talk about anything.
So should we just start with Jeffrey Rosen? I think we could. Well, or do we want to start with actually, maybe we should start with this. Do you have a strong preference?
Well, my introduction to the sort of groundbreaking ruling or whatever was through the Washington Journal interview.
Yeah.
He's a guest and he's really summarizing things. And I think if we start there, that would be good because he recommends some good next steps, and then we could do those next steps.
Yeah, and he's a good local guide. I think you're right. So I've got this clip. This clip is at 6 minutes. So it's his first 6 minutes. So we'll start here. For folks in the audience, feel free to put in the chat things that you notice. We will too. And as we're going, and let's take a listen.
We're joined now by Jeffrey Rosen. He's the president and CEO of the National Constitution Center, author of the book called The Pursuit of Happiness. Jeff, welcome back to the program.
Wonderful to be back.
So let's start with your reaction to yesterday's Supreme Court ruling on immunity.
Couldn't be more important and historic. It's really important for C-SPAN viewers to read the majority opinion and the dissent. The majority says that it's crafting a rule of immunity for the ages that's necessary to protect future presidents against political prosecutions by their successors. And the dissent says that this is an invented rule without basis in constitutional text, history, or structure that will imperil democracy, and in Justice Jackson's words, is a five-alarm fire for the future of America. So it's really, of course, there are many important historic Supreme Court decisions, but it's striking that in this one, both the majority and the dissent really emphasize the historic stakes, and they have a completely antithetical view about what the Constitution requires.
Explain.
What are you noticing so far? Oh, you're muted.
Right. Sorry. Right away. I heard like it's really important to read both opinions, and that they're very, very different because one says it protects the president's ability to do their job, and the other says it imperils democracy. Whoa. Those are really strong words. And the last thing he said is the historical stakes could not be higher. So it made me real curious, why is this such a historic moment in time?
Yeah, what did you say were the two descriptions? That one was a novel. What was the way you described it again? Can you repeat that?
The majority opinion was necessary to protect, said it was necessary to protect the president to do their job. And the dissenting opinion said it imperils democracy, which I guess we could read about in the actual opinion. But and it is the ruling. Yeah. So, whoa, what just happened?
Yeah,
everybody's upset. Personally, I don't really know yet at this point. Like when I heard that, I was like, really got my attention, wanted to learn more. So yeah, I guess we'll keep going.
Yeah, presumptive immunity. What is that?
It means that we presume that the president has immunity, but that can be overcome by showing that the act is not official. And the majority opinion establishes three categories of immunity. One, absolute immunity for activities at the core of the president's Article 2 function. Second, presumptive immunity for conduct that is at the periphery of those core activities. And third, unofficial acts for which there's no immunity. Now, the dissent says it's very unclear what the line between these categories is, and that inviting lower courts to make these fact-bound determinations, the majority is creating so much confusion that in practice, immunity will exist in all categories and the president will be above the law. That's the nature of the dispute.
What do you think the impact will be, especially based on what we know about what the founders intended, or what we think we know about what the founders intended for presidential power and checks and balances?
This is the most important question, and it's so
I want to actually, before we go to that next question, talk about the previous question.
What did you notice?
Yeah, I'm trying to let me roll it back just a little bit because by hearing the new question, I focused on the new questions. Let me go back to the last question a little bit. Let's see here.
Explain presumptive immunity. What does that mean?
it means that we presume that the president has immunity, but that can be overcome by showing that the act is not official. And the majority opinion establishes three categories of immunity. One, absolute immunity for activities at the core of the president's Article 2 function. Second, presumptive immunity for conduct that is at the periphery of those core activities. And third, unofficial acts for which there's no immunity. Now, the dissent says it's very unclear what the line between these categories is, and that inviting lower courts to make these fact-bound determinations, the majority is creating so much confusion that in practice, immunity will exist in all categories and the president will be above the law. But that's the nature of the dispute.
What do you
Yeah. So I guess talking about the different kinds of immunity, right? Absolute immunity. And then what was the second category of immunity?
Presumptive.
Presumptive immunity, right? That's at the periphery of the core duties. And then there's what everybody's been talking about, just private acts, right?
Non-official, yeah.
Non-official, yeah. And then did you okay, go ahead, what were you gonna say?
Well, I feel like we've got an example of how these the fuzzy boundary between official and unofficial play out in the Trump case. That's what everybody's so concerned about. We don't have to go there
Right.
now, but
No, but that was the concern of the dissenters, right?
yep.
That's their grand concern.
Oh, that, and then the extrapolation of just how bad things could get if this is the new world we live in.
Yeah. So let's now he says the next question is the most important. Let's see what he says about that.
do you think the impact will be, especially based on what we know about what the founders intended, or what we think we know about what the founders intended for presidential power and checks and balances?
This is the most important question, and it's so important to discuss it as we approach July 4th, to think about what the founders would have intended. The majority and dissent disagree about this. Both cite Alexander Hamilton, and in particular, Federalist 77 is cited in both opinions, and Hamilton's insistence that there should be energy in the executive. And the majority cites that to support its conclusion that the president has to have broad immunity or else he'll be chilled or deterred from vigorously exerting presidential power. And the majority quotes Hamilton's Pacificus letters, where he talked about the importance that there be unity in the executive and the president be able to act with vigor and dispatch. The dissent says they're completely misreading Hamilton. And Justice Sotomayor goes on to quote Federalist 77 to say, of course, the president has to be vigorous, but he'll be amenable to prosecution. And Justice Sotomayor says, this meant that Hamilton assumed that the major check on the president would be that, like any citizen, he would not be above the law and could, in fact, be prosecuted in criminal court. And Justice Sotomayor also quotes other framers of the Constitution, in particular, James Wilson. He was the guy who came up with the idea that we, the people of the United States as a whole, are sovereign. And also James Iredell and Charles Pinckney, all of whom at various points in the convention and after said that they imagined the president would be liable to criminal prosecution. And Justice Sotomayor accuses the majority of being bad originalists. She says there's literally no basis in constitutional text, history, or structure for this principle. It's a made-up, invented principle designed to ensure that the president isn't chilled in the exercise of his duties. And she basically says history only matters to the majority when it cares about it, in the gun control case, but here it's ignoring text and history. That's another thing that makes the dispute between the majority and the dissent so important and vigorous.
So back now to the present day, the January 6th trial goes back to the lower courts.
So let's pause here. I think this is a good place to go to. What did you notice in this next section? In this last section?
Thanks. Yeah, I noticed that he describes that the rulings both use the Federalist Papers, the one by Hamilton. What was it, the 77 something?
Yeah, Federalist 77. And I think they also used the Pacificus letters.
Yeah. And they use it for different conclusions, which is really fascinating to me. How you could have the same experience and come away with different, or you could have you could share the same letter, the same document, and come out with different outcomes. It's just, I think it's called biodiversity. When there's so many ways to look at the same thing, right?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting, right? Because what the dissenters are accusing the majority of is like Sotomayor accuses the majority of being bad originalists because they're ignoring that that Hamilton does say there should be checks, and that other founders assume that there would be checks on the presidency.
She would know.
So it's interesting, right? Like watching this play out, because for years conservatives have said they're originalists, but now this draws an interesting question about what the Supreme Court.
Yep, exactly.
So, and we were talking about, there was the three categories of immunity, right? What was it? Was it total immunity, or what was it called?
Absolute. Yeah, and then presumptive. And absolute is for the core activities. Mm-hmm. Presumptive is for the periphery duties or activities or responsibilities. And then there's in contrast to no immunity for unofficial
that's right.
Actions, I guess. So there's absolute immunity, presumptive immunity, and then no immunity for unofficial. An example of that might be Trump at a press conference speaking to a crowd of people, telling them if they want to fight for their democracy, they better go and do it. And they went and they did it. They went and stormed the Capitol that day, and that's what the case is about. But I think he used, if I understand it correctly, and maybe this is maybe for a later analysis, but just while we're talking about these definitions, what I gathered is that Trump was saying that speaking to the crowd directly was him in an absolute duty as president and deserves impunity, because that basically protects him from the indictment, the charges against him.
I see. So you're saying, so you believe that that perhaps it can be seen as done out of a love to the country, and that justifies it as an official act, perhaps, or that it was a necessity to the job, and so therefore it will get immunity in that. It could get immunity in that way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
he's not like on the phone arguing with his kids about where to invest their properties that they're embezzling, or they're keeping out of the tax havens or something. That might be like unofficial. But because he was able to, as a legal strategy, say that, look, I was just doing my presidential job that day. Give me a break. I've got impunity.
Yeah, right. Okay, I see your point. Yeah. So you're saying that he, that it's you're justifying that it's your job that way. Yeah. And okay, so should we take a little bit of a look at this now?
Yes, the actual opinion that everybody's so upset about or so happy about, depending on who you ask.
Yeah. Do we want to just take turns alternating paragraphs?
Okay.
I can start. Donald J. Trump, petitioner, United States.
On writ of certiorari to the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit.
Chief Justice Roberts delivered the opinion of the court. This case concerns the federal indictment of a former president of the United States for conduct alleged to involve official acts during his tenure in office. We consider the scope of a president's immunity from criminal prosecution.
From January 2017 until January 2017 until January 2021, Donald J. Trump served as President of the United States. On August 1st, 2023, a federal grand jury indicted him on 4 counts of conduct that occurred during his presidency following the November 2020 election. The indictment alleged that after losing that election, Trump conspired to overturn it by spreading knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the collecting, counting, and certifying of the election results.
According to the indictment, Trump advanced his goal through 5 primary means. First, he and his co-conspirators used knowingly false claims of election fraud to get state legislators and election officials to change electoral votes for Trump's opponent, Joseph or Biden, to electoral votes for Trump. APP 185, Indictment 10A. Second, Trump and his co-conspirators organized fraudulent slates of electors in 7 targeted states and caused these fraudulent electors to transmit their false certifications of the vice president and other government officials to be counted at the certification proceeding on January 6th. ID at 186-10B. Third, Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to use the Justice Department to conduct sham election crime investigations and to send a letter to the targeted states that falsely claimed that the Justice Department had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the election outcome. Fourth, Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to persuade the vice president to use his ceremonial role at the January 6th certification proceedings to fraudulently alter the election results. And when that failed on the morning of January 6th, they repeated knowingly false claims of election fraud to gathered supporters, falsely told them that the vice president had the authority to the Capitol to obstruct the certification proceeding. Fifth, when a large and angry crowd violently attacked the Capitol and halted the proceeding, Trump and his co-conspirators exploited the disruption by redoubling efforts to levy false claims of election fraud and convince members of Congress to further delay the certification.
Based on this alleged conduct, the indictment charged Trump with 1, conspiracy to defraud the United States in violation of 18 U.S. C Constitution, Section 371. And indictment number 2, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding in violation of Section 1512K. And indictment number 3, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding in violation. Next slide, please.
Yes. And yeah, we used, and just about,
I think there's more to my paragraph.
yeah, no. I was going to say USC also means United States Code.
Oh, code. Yes.
Yeah. I just pulled this up. Let's go back.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, talk about getting lost, losing the
no, it's easy.
The trees.
Yeah.
Section 1512.
Well, should we think about what's been said so far too, so that we can?
Yeah.
Let's just take a second and just think about what's being said here.
Right, like he had his. He called a gathering. Who invited all those people? Because they actually showed up on the day that the vice president was in a position to announce the electorate winner and had that ability to overturn it. It was quite a plan, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, it's pretty wild, right? Like something similar was done by President Rutherford B. Hayes, where he sent a delegation, and because of that, that was what ended the Reconstruction period.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very tragic. But okay, so yeah, so I'm noticing here also it's going over what Donald Trump's presidency was like in terms of the election. So
and then they're getting into the immunities.
Yeah, so Trump moved to dismiss the indictment based on presidential immunity. In his view, the conduct was alleged in the indictment properly characterized was that while he was president, 1, made public statements about the administration of the federal election, 2, communicated with senior Justice Department officials about investigating election fraud and about choosing the leadership of the department, 3, communicated with state officials about the administration of the federal election and their exercise of official duties with respect to it, 4, communicate with the vice president and with members of Congress about the exercise of their official duties regarding the election certification, and 5, authorized or directed others to organize contingent slates of electors in furtherance of his attempts to convince the vice president to exercise official authority in a manner advocated for by President Trump. So those slates of electors, that's what Rutherford B. Hayes did. To, I think, is it Tildich, who was the person who won the presidency, but who lost it because of these delegates.
Well, I tell you, this reminds me of the classic pattern, if you will, of a kind of an evil sort of bait and switch, where the bait is claiming the mantle of victimhood.
Yeah.
If you look at that first or second point, it was claiming election fraud, and therefore, the switch is calling for some reconciliation or some compensation for the claim of cheating,
Yeah.
even though,
The claim of
if I
cheating?
remember correctly, like maybe the timing hadn't quite worked itself out yet, but there was so many people interviewed that says, yeah, there's no fraud.
Yeah.
But if he says it enough, of course, people, at least in his camp, are going to believe it. And now this whole thing is a political witch trial.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like, there's a piece by Mike Lofgren about the movie The Deer Hunter and this notion of American innocence. But let's keep going. Should we? Let's see.
It would be good to kind of get to some of the offensive language in this majority opinion.
Mm-hmm.
If we could find it. I know there's only like 40 pages. Yeah, it'd be good if we could just sort of, in the spirit of Mr. Rosen's recommendation that every American read the opinions.
Yeah, well, let's try to find a way to divide this up a little bit because we've got 51 pages here in the majority. So let's see.
And it is on top of the hour here. So
yeah, maybe. I mean, we can keep exploring this, and like maybe what we want to do is maybe what we want to do is look at some of the dissents now a little bit.
Yeah, probably.
And
we can put links.
What's that?
We can share links in the.
Yeah, and if folks find sections they want us to read in the audience, just share in the chat what sections you want us to read.
Or if you want to come on the show and read,
yeah,
share the load.
Mm-hmm.
You would be reading the words of the Supreme Court of the United States. They just wrote it.
Yeah. So,
like walking in the footsteps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For better, for worse. So okay. Do you want to go to Sotomayor now?
Okay.
Let's jump to Sotomayor, and then that'll be a good start. And we can continue to explore this if we want. But I think this is good. And we also have some notes that we can take a look at and see how it all kind of stacks up.
And we do have those interviews. Maybe a few minutes of the.
That would be great. I think that'd be excellent.
Kind of put a nice bow on it. Summarize it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to 68. So should we just start from the beginning?
Sure.
Today's decision to grant former presidents criminal immunity reshapes the institution of the presidency. It makes a mockery of the principle foundational to our Constitution and system of government that no man is above the law. Relying on little more than its own misguided wisdom about the need for bold and unhesitating action by the president, ante at 313, the court gives former president all the immunity he asked for and more, because our Constitution does not shield a former president from answering for criminal and treasonous acts. I dissent.
The indictment paints a stark portrait of a president desperate to stay in power. In the weeks leading up to January 6, 2021, then President Trump allegedly spread lies that there has been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he actually won, despite being notified repeatedly by his closest advisors that his claims were untrue.
When dozens of courts swiftly rejected these claims, Trump allegedly pushed officials in certain states to ignore the popular vote, disfranchising millions of voters dismiss legitimate electors and ultimately cause the ascertainment of and voting by illegitimate electors in his favor. It is alleged that he went so far as to threaten one state election official with criminal prosecution if the official did not find 11,780 votes. Trump needed to change the election result in that state. When state officials repeatedly declined to act outside their legal authority and alter their state election processes, Trump and his co-conspirators reportedly developed a plan to disrupt and displace the legitimate election certification process by organizing fraudulent slates of electors. So what are you noticing? This is page 68.
Oh, sorry. I was noticing that he was bending, maybe breaking the rules to get his way. How about you?
Yeah, that's a great point, right? That he went so far as to ask somebody to find 11,780 votes. Wild.
And is it my turn?
Yeah, sure.
As the date of certification proceeding neared, Trump allegedly also sought to use the power and authority of the Justice Department to bolster his knowingly false claims of election fraud by initiating sham election crime investigations and spending official letters falsely claiming that the Justice Department had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the election outcome, while falsely presenting the fraudulent electors as a valid alternative to the legitimate electors. Wow. When the department refused to do as he asked, Trump turned to the vice president. Initially, he sought to persuade the vice president to use his ceremonial role at the January 6th certification proceeding to fraudulently alter the election results. I guess it was no coincidence that the big gathering was on January 6th, where they knew that date was significant. And so people made reservations to come across the country.
Yeah, Trump actually announced it publicly that J6 should be the day.
So yeah, people could get there. And how many people showed up? Like hundreds of, tens of thousands?
A lot of people.
Yeah. It's just amazing that many people could be, So when persuasion failed, he purportedly attempted to use a crowd of supporters that he had gathered in Washington, D.C. to pressure the vice president to fraudulently alter the election results. So that's, I guess, why they went knocking.
Yeah. So there's this sense that there's this fraudulent act, right? And the Supreme Court's asking this question about immunity, and that Trump made false claims, misleading people about what was possible and what was not possible.
Yeah.
Now, I'm wondering, let's see, do we want to, what if we say this is a good introduction to the dissent and the majority opinion, and we take a look at the podcast for a moment and wrap up on that?
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, we got a flavor of what constitutional judges, Supreme Court judges are are opinionating about the trial and the allegations. It's really amazing.
Yeah, and I think that actually, if we wanted to too, we could actually take some of this content and take little portions of it and maybe curate it a little bit on Instagram or something. We can play with that, but I've got some ideas about that. All right, let's.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could come back to Washington Journal tomorrow.
Yeah.
Follow up. Thank you.
Definitely. Yeah.
Turning us on to these resources.
I know they're good resources. They really, it's nice to have them.
I didn't even know we had a constitutional center for people to learn about the Constitution.
Amazing. Amazing. So yeah, we're going to play a little bit of this. This is from We the People with Jeffrey Rosen. So same person, but podcast.
Hello, friends. I'm Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center, and welcome to We the People, a weekly show of constitutional debate. The National Constitution Center.
Is this very loud? Or is this okay?
I could hear it just fine.
Okay, good.
Center is a nonpartisan nonprofit chartered by Congress to increase awareness and understanding of the Constitution among the American people. In this episode of We the People, I'm excited to share a conversation about Trump versus U.S. and presidential immunity with Harold Hongju Ko of Yale Law School, Deborah Pearlstein of Princeton, and Matthew Waxman of Columbia Law School. We discuss this week's landmark Supreme Court ruling that former presidents enjoy sweeping immunity from criminal prosecution. And we explore the history of executive power in light of Harold's book, The National Security Constitution in the 21st Century. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Harold Ko, Deborah Pearlstein, and Matthew Waxman. Professor Ko, I had the great privilege of taking your class in law school. No one better explains the history and current practice of national security law than you, and it's very fortunate that we have you today. U.S. v. Trump has just come down, the landmark decision on presidential immunity. Tell us, if you will, how your book, tracing the evolution of executive power throughout the American history, in some ways predicts today's decision, and how does today's decision change or not the law of executive power and the Constitution?
Well, thank you, Jeff. All of your listeners know that the Constitution is driven by a principle of checks and balances. The question is, do those checks and balances actually apply in foreign affairs and national security? And the surprising answer is that unfortunately they don't. It's become an exception to the notion that our system of separation of powers is supposed to check executive unilateralism. And what the book does is it says, America, we have a problem. The problem is structural, not just personalities. And so we need structural solutions. So what is the structural problem? That we have a system of bad incentives. The executive has an incentive to overreach and to engage in unilateral activity. Republicans tend to do it proactively. Democrats tend to do it reactively. The courts defer and acquiesce, and then the Congress tends to do nothing. So what happened here is that back in 1982, when I was actually clerking for the Supreme Court had two decisions which appeared to limit the scope of immunities for the president and also for high executive officials. But nobody at that time, absolutely nobody, thought that the president had absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. In fact, that was the default assumption. When the DC Circuit ruled in favor of the notion that there was no immunity, everybody thought that there would be either a cert denial or a summary affirmance. The Supreme Court didn't even need to hear it. But what happened today instead is that the Supreme Court has shifted from a presumption against immunity to a very dramatic expansion of immunity. This furthers these negative incentives for all three branches. I was a lawyer for the executive branch. If the president now wants to do something that's at the edge of the law, you have to now explain, well, you now have a very serious possibility of getting immunity. After all, if Trump got it, or trying to steal an election, and you're trying to do something urgent in foreign affairs, the likelihood that you're going to be held accountable for that is very low. This is exactly what Reagan said during the Iran-Contra affair. The American people will never forgive me if I fail to get them out over this legal question. The courts have deferred and rubber stamped, as the book predicted. In this case, as the dissent pointed out, through brute force, they created immunity that has no basis in text, no basis in function, and would clearly create a situation where the president could do all kinds of official activities and then be called immune. So, for example, the president talking to the attorney general about Watergate, as Nixon did to John Mitchell, would be beyond the scope of any judicial examination. And finally, when Congress does intervene, as it tried to do in terms of creating an obstruction statute, the Supreme Court actually intervenes to strike it down, which is what happened the other day in the Fisher case. So you couldn't have a clearer example of the president now being given greater incentives to overreach, the courts using their power to maximize that unilateral action, and then Congress being disempowered even when it tried to act. So the net result is what drove this throughout the opinion is a fear of what Chief Justice Roberts called enfeebling the presidency. In other words, we need a vigorous president who's unfettered so he can protect us against national security threats. What it doesn't account for is what we saw under the first Trump administration. What if the president is himself a national security threat? There's no constraint against that because the president's official conduct has been placed outside the rule of law. And that's what makes it such a devastating opinion.
Fascinating. Thank you very much for that.
So yeah, what did you notice there?
That the problem is structural, he said, and that you kind of need to address the root structure, I guess, with policy and like a different opinion, and how I think Trump went from presumptive, or the courts went from presumptive to absolute, which was kind of a big shift, historical shift. And yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I think what I noticed here is I noticed that that it wasn't just this question of the president being able to assassinate somebody, it's that there are many cases for which the president is not responsible. And I'm trying to think of the exact examples that he was talking about. But this is certainly something that we could also come back to even next week if we wanted to keep looking at it. Like, there's a lot here. This is really cool. And we could even work on this on Sunday for the Sunday early morning session.
Mm-hmm.
And see if we can't organize it into some Instagram posts for people. And maybe some Twitter posts too.
Yeah, there is a clarity to be had.
Yeah, well, there's a lot, like there's a lot of detail here, and admittedly, in the lateness of the evening, I'm also not as sharp on this, so we're going to move it back next week, I think, too, for that reason as well, because there's a lot here. It's really I've been looking at it all day today, but it really is. It's a lot. Like, it's cool to see the challenge of it.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. who does this for a living, like govern with all of the legal definitions that kind of, you can spend all day maybe parsing out the definition of like one word. It's like,
Yeah. Well,
I guess they like it because that's why they're there, but I just can't imagine.
yeah, it's interesting, right? Like thinking about what like in some ways, right, this is like a grand carve out, right? Like where they're looking at like a lot of different cases and trying to think about like, okay, how do we make the president as comfortable as he feels he deserves, I guess, maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah.
To have a robust president doing what's necessary.
Yeah.
As an executive, you gotta have impunity for the most part.
This is going to be the fear, right? And so it's interesting looking at the different just starting to look at everything and seeing the different angles. Maybe let's take a look back at our notes for just a second and see if there's anything else we want to put down on here.
It would be interesting to hear more and go back and write more notes. But
yeah, we can. Yeah,
I can kind of see where it is getting late, and I mean, we could go on for a long time, and but the good news is we're hearing from constitutional scholars who've been there before, and they can kind of see the big picture. And do you think they're doing a good job of breaking it down for?
I do. Yeah, real good. I think they're doing a good job. I think there's a lot of information there and a lot of detail. But I do think feel like it's very helpful. But then it's interesting, right? Because like we look at the decision and the majority opinion and the dissent, and there's a lot of just different very very like a lot of detail there, and so it's giving me ideas for my next step, which is to see if we can't like do some of this learning in like a little bit of a social media context and see where that goes. Maybe even in flock fishing too.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Well,
that would be huge success.
So looking at some of this stuff, what are maybe we can talk about some general things, some generalizations that we've learned from tonight, or think about like maybe 3 things that we're going to be thinking about on this subject that we're going to take with us in trying to deepen our wisdom on this subject. Like, what's one thing from tonight that you're going to keep working on or keep using to learn with?
How about I'm going to try to think more carefully about checks and balances and try to think of some examples that having a stricter interpretation can help or hurt democracy and human rights. I mean, because I think there was like an article in the National that said basically the opinion, the majority opinion, gives the president to commit any crimes that they want with impunity. So that's pretty much the end of checks and balances.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody today and they were like, well, hasn't America always been this corrupt? And I said, well, when Nixon committed his crimes, he was very concerned and he wanted a pardon. Like, he wouldn't have been so concerned if he knew that he could do whatever he wanted to. It's not something that just inherently comes from what the rule book says, right?
Yeah, good point.
Well, yeah, so I guess the thing that I'll be taking with me on the subject for next time is thinking in terms of, like, when I was looking at the majority and the minority positions, there's a lot of detail in there, and giving myself lots of time to read it and maybe read it with others in our community. Like, it wasn't so hard to understand as it was, there was just a lot of it, right? And a lot of detail.
I find it helpful when they give examples of what the implications are to both sides. Yeah, I know that we almost didn't have a constitution because nobody wanted to form a strong federal or national government, because it resembled too much like a monarchy to have an executive president with that much power. It was, they were going to call the whole thing off back in 1787.
Are you talking about the Great Compromise?
No, I mean,
I know they almost, at the Constitutional Convention, there was the fight over whether the states would have the strength of the Senate or not. A lot of people, I think, was it Madison, who fought to try to just have it be a House of Representatives and not a Senate. But the states won out. And they almost walked away from the Constitutional Convention at that time, too.
Even before that, nobody showed up for the first Constitutional Convention in Annapolis. And so they reached out to the young nations, everybody's favorite, George Washington, for winning the war or the revolution, and said, because everybody was scared to give the federal or national government too much power, because since then, since the Declaration of Independence and winning the war, for a couple of years there, they had strong state government, but no national government to protect borders, raise taxes, or like resolve common new country issues between states. And so it wasn't looking good, but then they talked Washington out of retirement. And once he learned that, there's a lot of revolution up and down the different colony states, that they really needed to enact a bold new government at the national level, they oh, good. You're finding some stuff there. Yeah, the year before, I heard just hardly anybody showed up because they didn't want to do it. But then once Washington shows up, everybody's like, okay, well, maybe let's talk about it. And they thought they were going to reform the Articles of the Confederation, and really the Virginia delegate brought the Virginia plan. They were like, no, we need to totally redo this thing to actually give a strong, national government presence. And that story can be heard in an episode of a podcast season called The Land That Never Has Been Yet on the Scene on Radio podcast. And episode 1 is called A Rich Man's Revolt. and it's really interesting. It talks about the Constitutional Convention, that Madison was like the only like official note keeper because they made a rule in the beginning to not take any notes, almost like giving the president impunity so that they can talk about and just delegate or deliberate on the issues of forming a new government however they needed to, behind closed doors where nobody would know, except for he had all the notes, and he never published them publicly. And they were recently released, to the historians, and they've been diving in. And one of the results is this podcast series or season called "The Land That Never Has Been Yet," about democracy in the United States. It's fascinating. I'll put a link in somewhere. Oh, I think
that's very, that's very, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Very cool.
And it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look up at the famous Faulkner paintings in the Archives building above the Constitution documents, you'll see they all thought of themselves as kings, because they were very powerful people who owned all this land and all these slaves, and I mean they were literally living like kings in this new colony, in this new land. They didn't really want a revolution; they got dragged into it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because there's a lot to say about that, right? Especially with how recruitment worked and things like that. But that's another thing we could explore too. But yeah, so if we're thinking about, it's been interesting also looking at like the different frameworks of the bill, like the absolute, presumptive, and unofficial stuff. And I think for next time, for Sunday, I'm going to keep looking at this and trying to figure out what are some simple ways we can break this down. And maybe we can break it down even with a couple of short videos on Instagram and Twitter. So that's what I'm thinking we might focus on through Sunday. Do you have any more thoughts about any action you might take on this, or anything how you might use this? You think of anything?
I might check in with Rosen, or maybe some of his guest interviewers that he had on that podcast, to see if they are putting out social media posts, if they're giving opinions like in real time in the last few days. Maybe just pursue the some of the primary sources that we have a little bit farther. If they're doing social media posts that we can just repost, that would be really helpful.
That'd be cool too. Yeah, I think both could be interesting.
Like Twitter soundbite-y kind of things.
We can. So folks in the audience too, if you see stuff, send it to us. Let us know. Get involved, because we want to see what everybody finds and build this together, and see if we can't make something, even if it's just a list of sources that we put up on our website, something that's helpful for people. So,
yeah. I mean, it could be much to do about nothing, but if you start thinking about human rights and what the implications are, I think in the dissenting opinion, there were lots of examples, and I don't think we got to them just yet. But
not yet. No.
They were referred
there's much to work on, for sure.
Yeah. So maybe getting to some of those pages or timestamps, and having a little bit more substance for next time. Key content.
Yeah, I think so. Well,
cool.
Thanks so much, Tim, for as usual joining us and making this all possible. This was really great, and it was really good to go on this adventure today, this legal adventure through all of this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for bearing with me. I'm definitely new to all this, but it has been really helpful.
Yeah, we're
the good work that you're bringing, the resources, the primaries.
Thank you.
I mean, they're intense, and I think the founding fathers never trusted the people to make hard decisions like regarding the economy and the money, and I could also see them saying the same thing about the law. And here we are trying to pierce that veil.
Yeah, well, trying to find some truth in all of this, right? And trying to put things right and make a better society and bring human rights. So,
yeah. And I did remember a resource that I looked at this morning. I forgot to mention it, but it has to do with one of the constitutional scholars that we heard from in the podcast had, I think, a reference. And when I followed it, it was a big opinion in some little journal about the Constitution law being inherently political in nature. And that like if traditional Constitution law looks back in history for precedent, and that it's always referring backwards, that the political nature of the law is looking in the future. And it's by necessity that it engages with future policy implications of the law. And it was really
unless it wants to be dead on arrival, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really fascinating. Well,
I'm looking forward to Sunday.
Yeah, no, me too. This has been really great. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone in our audience tonight who's been here with us on this journey. We look forward to continuing this conversation with you all this weekend and going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.